Hi everyone, good morning here. And today we will welcome Elizabeth and Zia to provide the immigration webinar for the Canadore international student. So today I hope you have more information received from Elizabeth and Zia. And just so you know that on the FAQ later on, we will try to answer some questions for you lively or provide some answer to you, but something regarding to the Canadore admissions, travel support letter, please, I would like to redirect you back to international@canadorecollege.ca. We will have the detailed information for you. And today we would like Elizabeth and Zia to provide the professional immigration webinar for you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Hans. Just an introduction. Zia and I are immigration lawyers in Toronto. We're at the firm of Long Mangoji. And what we've been working with Canadore for many years to provide students with information about what you need to do to stay legally in Canada, work legally in Canada, okay? And then we will also be talking about how to get permanent residence as well, okay? So let's get started. Before we go into permanent residence, there are a few concepts that you really need to understand when you are a temporary resident. First of all, you need to know about implied status, okay? So what is implied status? In order to get implied status, you have to have, if you have temporary status, let's just say your study permit is going to expire, let's say by December 31st, okay? Now, all of you guys as study permit holders are temporary residents, and that means you don't have an indefinite time to stay in Canada. So take a look at your study permit and look at the validity date, okay? It's valid until a certain date. That is the time when your time is up in Canada. Now, you can always file an extension of your time if you qualify. So let's say I want to continue to study in Canada. So I'm going to file an extension in Canada for my study permit. Now, the website says that you should be filing an extension, 30 days, over 30 days before. That's a recommendation. That is actually not the law. The law is as long as you file the application before your status expires, even on the day of. I don't recommend to do things last minute, especially with technical difficulties and all that, okay? But even if you have filed it the day of or the day before, you are legally able to be in Canada until a decision is made. That's what's called implied status or maintained status as well. You will maintain your status until a decision is made. Oftentimes, decisions can take 2 months to be made. So if let's say I submitted my application in December 31st, and it expires on, just on December 31st, okay? Let's say I just submitted on that day. I have the ability to continue to study in Canada until a decision is made. Let's say it's made on February 1st, and hopefully I get my study permit by then, and all is well. I can continue to study until that date. So what happens though if I didn't file it in time? What happens if, New Year's Eve, December 31st, I go out partying and, I'm, enjoying myself. And then January 1st, I wake up, oh, I got such a headache. And something is wrong. I think something is wrong. And I suddenly remember, oh, shoot, my study permit, did it expire? Shoot, it expired. Okay. Then what do I do? My study permit has expired. If I had filed it a few hours before, I would be okay. But now I have no status. What can you do? So the law allows you to restore your status. You can normally restore your status within 90 days of you losing status. Okay, there was a policy for COVID that is just ending on August 31st, that if you had lost your status after January 30th of last year, you had until August 31st of this year to file, but that's ending. So for you guys, remember 90 days from the date that you lost your status. Okay, so if I lost because I didn't file it in time, I lost my status on December 31st, I have 90 days to file a restoration of status. But until I get a decision on my study permit, I have no status, and therefore I have to stop studying. I can stay in Canada and wait for the decision, but I have to stop studying. So I may lose an entire semester. Okay, so that's very, very important for you guys to understand. Make sure you file the extension of whatever status you need, study permit, and we're going to talk about work permits afterwards, okay, before it expires. Just one last thing. Well, actually, two things. The first thing is, if I filed my application, but let's say I did a mistake. Let's say I filed it in time. Let's say I filed it on December 29th, okay? Way before my status expires on December 31st. But I attached the wrong passport, okay? And the officer rejects my application because the passport I had attached has expired, and they rejected on February 1st. When does my restoration period start? Well, it starts on February 1st, okay? Because I lost my status, I had maintained my status until February 1st. But if I didn't submit some crucial things, such as the application fees or the forms properly, okay, let's say I didn't submit the application fee properly for my study permit. What happens then? The officer can reject, it's not even reject, it's return my application. So it's as if I didn't file it at all. And so then my restoration period would start on January, it expires on December 31st. Okay, so instead of it expiring on February 1st when the decision comes, it expired on December 31st. Okay. All right, so the third concept that I want to talk to you guys about, and this time I'm going to switch it up. So if any of you have come to my lectures before, I always talk about high-skilled versus low-skilled work, because currently for permanent residents, this makes a huge difference. The government has what's called a national occupation classification system, which sort of divides, sort of has a special code for all occupations that they can think of. And so in order to apply for most permanent residence applications, almost all permanent residence applications under the economic categories, you have to find the code for your occupation. And the occupations right now are divided between high-skilled and low-skilled positions. O, A, and B are high-skilled, C and D are low-skilled, okay? And so, most of the time when we talk about permanent residence, you're going to look at your codes, your occupation, whether or not it's high-skilled or low-skilled. However, the government now is going to soon release a new NOC code where instead of 5 categories, there's going to be 6 categories. And some of the old occupation categories are going to be changing as well. So it remains to be seen what IRCC is going to be doing with this new category. It's likely to be implemented by next year, okay? By the way, whatever I tell you guys today may be true today, but it likely will be changing. And these are some of the things that will be changing. So we're going to be putting you guys into our newsletter list where we can update you guys on some important immigration changes. Okay, so these are things that you have to keep in mind. I'm telling you guys some general information, but laws often change. And just like this one, okay, we can be, changing, just like this one, it very well will be changing by next year, and new things will come into place as well. If you're in Canada for 1 or 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, the laws will be changing throughout this time. So it's very important to keep up to date and keep informed. Okay, so Zia, do you want to talk about traveling to Canada?
Definitely. So for basically coming to Canada, right, the first step is to apply for your study permit from outside of Canada. Now, if you have already filed your study permit application and you're still waiting for a decision to be made, so your study permit to be approved, you can still start studying online right now for the fall 2021 semester. Okay, so IRCC does have a policy in place right now because of COVID to allow for international students to start their programs online outside of Canada while they're still waiting for a decision on that study permit application to be made. Now, this is of course dependent on you actually having submitted the application. Okay, so as long as it's in processing, you can still start studying in your program. The time that you take right now to be studying to start your program, that will still count towards your eligibility for your postgrad work permit, which we'll talk about shortly, as long as the study permit itself is eventually approved. Okay, so for this fall 2021 semester, you can start studying online and that will not affect eligibility for the postgrad work permit as long as the study permit is eventually approved. Now, for those of you who have already been approved and are looking to be traveling to Canada shortly, to be able to enter Canada, there's 2 requirements that you need to think about, okay? You need to have a valid study permit or a letter of introduction, right? So either your study permit was previously approved, you've already received it, and you're coming back to Canada, so you have your study permit, that's fine. Or if you've just applied and just received your approval, that letter of introduction that you received, you do need to have that on you when you're traveling. The second thing is that you need to be attending a designated learning institution that has a COVID-19 plan ready, okay, that's been approved by the province. Now, when you're actually traveling, okay, the current rules are that you do need to have a COVID test, an approved COVID test done within 72 hours of your flight. So notice that we're talking about 72 hours and not 3 days. So it's really important to be thinking about when your 72 hours will start, and that's from your last flight. So the final flight that takes you into Canada, the time of that flight is when you start counting backwards for the 72-hour window, okay? And your COVID test has to be taken within that 72-hour window, okay? And of course, it does have to show a negative result. And the second thing is that you do need to submit an isolation plan through the ArriveCAN app. We'll talk about exemptions in a moment from the isolation plan, and these are new policies that have been put in place. But regardless, it is still important that 1, you're taking that COVID test, and 2, you're submitting your quarantine plan through that ArriveCAN app. Now, when you are traveling, the rule of thumb is generally to be only traveling within 4 weeks from the start of your program. Okay, so for example, if your program's starting in January, you wouldn't be traveling to Canada right now. You would want to travel in the last 4 weeks before your program is to start.
Oops, sorry.
If you are fully vaccinated with one of Canada's approved vaccines, and it has been at least 14 days since you've received your last dose of that vaccine, you don't have to quarantine anymore. So when you arrive in Canada, you will get a quarantine exemption. So keep in mind, you still do have to go through the ArriveCan app. You still do have to submit your isolation plan. However, when you arrive in Canada, the officer will be able to validate that you have received your vaccines, and then they will exempt you from the isolation requirement from that 14 days. You'll also need to upload proof of that vaccination onto the ArriveCan app. Now, if you have not been vaccinated, if you have not had your last dose for at least 14 days, then you will still need to do that 14-day isolation.
All right, so let's move on to studying and working while you are in Canada on your study permit. Now, what we're talking about here it only applies to people who are actually in Canada, okay? You can do whatever you want outside of Canada with regard to your work. But there are restrictions on your work when you're studying inside Canada. So the first thing is, with regard to your status in Canada, if you do not actively pursue studies, you will lose your student status within 90 days. So there are two exceptions to the rule. One is the scheduled breaks. So for example, if you have summer breaks, these are all highlighted in the calendar, okay? So if you have certain breaks and that are on the calendar, then you can actually, that's not counted for these, it's still counted as actively pursuing studies. The second kind of exception is authorized leave. So if you have an exceptional circumstance, let's say you need to take care of a family member because of COVID and you can't study, you can ask the school to give you authorized leave. The authorized leave can't be more than 150 days. If it's more than 150 days, you're in Canada, you'll have to apply for visitor status, okay? But within 150 days, you can get what's called authorized leave, and you can, and that is still counted as actively pursuing studies. Now, it's very important that when you look at whether or not you can work, during the calendar scheduled breaks, you can work full-time, okay? There's no limit to the amount of work. If you're on scheduled break, that's, summer breaks, whatever's in the academic calendar, you can work full-time. But when you are on authorized leave, you cannot work at all, full-time or part-time at all. So don't look at authorized leave as a time that you can, go and make some money and not study. If you're not studying and you're on authorized leave, you won't lose your status for that semester, but you cannot work at all. So the reason why for authorized leave is because under the law, you can only work when you are a full-time student, except there's an exception in the last semester, because some people, you just need to finish 1 or 2 more courses, right? In the last semester, you can work full-time. When you've completed your studies, you are no longer a student and you have to stop working. So when you've received the first indication that you've completed your studies, whether or not it's online in your portal, whether it's a letter by the school, it's usually not when you graduate and get your diploma or certificate, right? It's usually they will tell you beforehand. So when that happens, you are no longer a student and you can't work at all. You can't work full-time, you can't work part-time. Okay. Zia is going to talk about postgrad work permits. You can start working when you apply for the postgrad work permit, but until you do, you cannot work at all. There is one exception to this, and it's if you are going to do another program within 150 days. So let's say I graduated, I finished my first program in April, and then I've already been accepted. You already have to be accepted to the second program in September, okay? if it's in that case, then I can work during the summer in between the two programs. If your classes are canceled because of COVID, you can work as a part-time, but like if they're canceled, but make very clear the record that your classes are canceled. Keep that record with you so that you can show that you are working because the classes were canceled. Any announcements by the school, any emails, any letters, keep that with you as evidence. Okay, Zia, can we talk about postgrad work permits?
Yes, definitely. So you've heard us mention the postgrad work permit. You heard Elizabeth mention it right now, but what is it? So the postgrad work permit is an open work permit that's available for international students who have recently completed their program of study. So it's really an important step towards applying for permanent residence, as you'll hear in a couple minutes, as it allows you to work for any company in any position. Now, with that being said, there's a couple things to keep in mind. The first question is, should I apply for a postgrad work permit? Now, the reason that we want you to think about this question is because you can only obtain a postgrad work permit once in your lifetime. Okay, now there's an exception to that, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But for now, the postgrad work permit for new students, you can only get it once in a lifetime, right? It's like a unicorn. It only comes around once. And the length of that postgrad work permit will coincide with the length of the program that you've studied in. So if you have done a program between 8 months to 2 years, then your postgrad work permit will also be the same length of your program. So for example, if you do a 1-year program, you'd be eligible for a 1-year postgrad work permit. Now, if your program is 2 years or longer, then you're eligible for a 3-year postgraduate work permit. And that's the maximum length of time that you can get a postgrad work permit for. Now, if you've done, let's say, multiple programs, right? So you did 2 1-year programs. You may be able to combine those programs together to benefit from the combined duration of study here in Canada, right? So 2 1-year programs means you've studied here for 2 years, which would mean that you're eligible for the full 3-year work permit. So these are important things to keep in mind to determine, should you be applying for the postgrad work permit, or do you want to be potentially doing another program and then applying for it later? Now, in terms of eligibility for the postgrad work permit, it is really important. You must have maintained full-time status during each semester of the program. And I'm emphasizing the word each semester, okay? IRCC is very particular about ensuring that applicants have been a full-time student in every semester of their program, okay? Now, full-time status is dependent on the school, and so really it is going to, the IRCC defers to the school for that definition, but it is important to ensure that anytime you're studying, that you are a full-time student. Now, of course, there are exceptions to that rule. There is an exception for if you're on an authorized leave, which Elizabeth just talked about, or if you're in your final semester. So again, if you're in your final semester and you do not need a full-time course load in that last semester to complete your program, then you can be part-time, and that won't affect the eligibility for the postgrad work permit. There's also an exception for classes that were canceled early during COVID, okay? And so again, you know, there's the recognition that this was a worldwide problem, and so certainly you won't be penalized if you had to, if your classes were canceled and that meant that you ended up on part-time status because of COVID. Now, as soon as you apply for the postgrad work permit, so if you remember from the previous slide, Elizabeth talked about working on that study permit, right? So you can work part-time on your study permit until you receive confirmation that you've completed your program of study. At that point, you can no longer work on your study permit, right? So you can't work anymore. Now, as soon as you apply for the postgrad work permit, you can start working full-time as long as your study permit is still valid and you're within 90 days of the completion of your program. So when we're talking about being able to start working again, you can start full-time, right? So it's no longer part-time, you can start working full-time as long as you've applied for your postgrad work permit, you hold a valid study permit, and it's within 90 days of the finish of your program. Now, why is that 90 days important? Why do we talk about 90 days? Because your study permit itself will only be valid to the earlier date of the expiry that's listed on that study permit, or 90 days following the completion of your program. Okay, so yes, IRCC's website does say that you have 180 days to apply for that postgrad work permit, but you also need to keep in mind the validity of your study permit itself. Okay, so again, it's the earlier of the expiry date on your study permit, or the or 90 days following the completion of your program. And so that's when you receive any notification that you've finished your program of study.
Okay, perfect. All right, let's talk about permanent residence. Now, the first category that I want to talk to you guys about is the express entry application. Many of you probably heard about this. This is one of the most popular categories. So I'm going to go over an overview of this, and we're going to talk about how these points and this system might apply to you. Okay, so just a general overview. In order to apply for express entry, you have to create an online profile, and you get to create an online profile if you qualify under one of three categories: the skilled worker class, Canadian experience class, or the skilled trades class. And if you qualify, you get to enter the pool. Now, a lot of people think, oh, I've entered the pool, I have applied for permanent residence. No, you have not. Okay, just because you enter the pool, it doesn't mean that you have made an application. Immigration does not count that as making an application. You have just basically become a candidate to be selected to be invited. Okay, and there are a few 100,000 people in the express entry pool. Every 2 weeks or so, the government will have a draw where they invite people to apply. So when you enter the pool, you'll get a series of points based on your background and also based on whether or not you have provincial nomination. And like I said, every 2 weeks, the government will have a draw, and they will invite maybe 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 people. Normally that's around the amount. Sometimes it's less, sometimes it's a lot more, to apply with them. And if you receive that invitation to apply, can you actually apply for permanent residence? Okay, so let's get that terminology straight. When you enter the pool, you have just entered the pool. You have not applied yet. You can only apply after you receive invitation to apply. Okay, and that means when you apply, if you qualify for everything like you said you did, and you can show proof of that, then the officer can grant you permanent residence. Until you get the invitation to apply, you can't do that. So let's talk about first how to get into the pool. How can you even qualify to get into the pool? Well, a lot of you probably may already be able to get into the pool under the federal skilled worker class. Under this class, you have to have 1 year of HighSkilled. We talked about what HighSkilled was. Full-time, which is equivalent to 30 hours a week. Now, if you can combine part-time hours as well, okay? But you need to have at least 1 year of work experience that's HighSkilled, and at least 1,560 hours, which equals to 30 times 52. And it needs to be in one occupation. Okay, so this work experience can be anywhere in the world. It does not have to be in Canada. It can be while you are studying, and it can be self-employed as well. And this is only for the federal skilled worker class. Now, if you have this work experience and you can pass the language exam, for IELTS it would be 6, self-employed would be 7, but this is just to get into the pool. This is not, this language points, that level probably won't be enough to get you an invitation to apply, but this is just to qualify to get into the pool. And then they'll take a look at other factors, okay, education, age, family, and yourself in Canada. For a single person, it's around 13,000 or so. It's increased by a couple thousand for each additional family member. Okay. The second one is the Canadian Experience class. So it used to be before COVID that the government would just invite everybody in the pool 99% of the time. However, starting last year and this year, there hasn't been any draws for anyone under the federal skilled worker class, probably because the government feels that right now, because it's difficult for people to travel to Canada, there's no point in inviting people under the federal skilled worker class. So this year, it's all been so far under the Canadian Experience class. And the work experience for the Canadian Experience class is very different. The work experience for the Canadian Experience class requires 1 year of high-skilled work experience in Canada that is employed. So self-employed work does not count. And you have to not be a full-time student. You have to be working legally, okay? And so this work experience, you can combine part-time. It does not have to be continuous. The first one, it requires you to have continuous work experience for at least 1 year. This one, the work experience does not have to be continuous, does not have to be in one occupation. The language is again something that you have to qualify for, but whatever you need to qualify for this probably may or may not be enough to get you the ITA for express entry, those points, okay? But this is the Canadian Experience class. There's one more for the skilled trades. And those are for people, I usually don't use this for students because you would need to have provincial certification in your trade or LMIA in the trade in order to qualify under this category. Okay, and this is mainly the construction workers, cooks and chefs as well. Okay. Okay, so let's say you get into the pool, okay, and we have, let's say, 4 people here. Now, if the score has been, let's say, 415, okay, who's going to get invited? Well, Jing, Trupti, Kwan, you say, right? Their points are all above that. May or may not be. Right now, if they don't qualify under the Canadian Experience class and the draw was only for Canadian Experience class, they may not get an invitation to apply. They won't get an invitation to apply if they don't qualify. If the draw, it's not only now the number, it is also the category as well, okay? All right, so let's talk about how you can get points under express entry. First thing is age, okay? Once you turn 30, it's no longer happy birthdays, okay? Every year when you turn 30, your age points drop by 5 or 6 points. 40s is a fast slide, -10, -11, okay? So, not a lot you can do about age except not to wait. Apply earlier when you can, okay? Education is also very important. So those people who have two post-secondary programs, one of which is a 3-year post-secondary program, and the other one can be at any level, you will see that points will jump. Okay, it's almost like another tier. Okay, sometimes it jumps by like 40, 50, 60, 70 points. Okay, so it will jump. Okay, language is another very, very important one. You're looking at over 200 points just based on language alone. Okay, so it's very important to have, if you don't have work experience in Canada, and so under the federal skilled worker class, most of the time we're looking at people who have at least a 7 in reading, writing, and speaking, and an 8 in listening for IELTS, and CELPIP is 9s. Okay, if you have the Canadian work experience, so this is the work experience that you will get when you're not a full-time student. And so this is very similar to the Canadian experience class, and this is very important as well. And this is why the postgrad work permit is going to be very important for you, because it's not very easy to get a work permit in Canada. You can only get one postgrad work permit, like Zia said, in your lifetime. It's very important to make that count, because in order to get this work experience, you need to have at least 1 year. So if you only have a 1-year work permit and you don't find a job right away, that can create a lot of difficulties for you. Okay. Foreign work experience, you can also count it if it's within the last 10 years, and it's high-skilled work experience. Spouse, sometimes if your spouse is a super spouse, you might have a few more points if you're married. Otherwise, it's probably the same or a few points lower. Zia is going to be talking about provincial nominee programs, especially the one in Ontario, where if it is express entry linked, it has to be express entry linked in order to count. If it is express entry linked, you will get 600 points for provincial nominee programs. Previous study in Canada. So if you have studied in Canada, so in a public college like Canadore, you will get 15 points for the 1 or 2 year program, or 30 points if it's a 3-year program. Now, it's super important to understand that express entry, the government still has not changed the requirements for this because of COVID. The requirements for this is that you have studied, you are in Canada for 8 months, okay? And so if you are studying online and you're outside of Canada, you may not be able to, I don't know if the government is going to change those rules or not. They haven't yet. And so you may not get the 15 points if you're outside of Canada. But if you're, and so if you have a choice, do come to Canada and study in Canada. Arranged employment. A lot of people think, oh, I have a job offer. I have arranged employment. No, you don't have arranged employment points just because you have a job offer. You can only get arranged employment if you have an employer-specific work permit or LMIA. Postgrad work permits don't count for this. So most students do not have arranged employment. If you have siblings who are Canadians or permanent residents in Canada, you get 15 points. And if you're fluent in French, this will give you a lot of points, but you do have to take the TEF or the TCF, I believe. And these tests, you have to achieve what's equivalent to like the 6 in IELTS in order to get the 50 points for French, and then you'll get some points for a second language as well. Okay. And trade certification, that's with the trades, mostly for the construction trades and cooks and chefs. Okay. All right. So if you take a look at this, some of you may be laughing. You're saying, oh, wow, I can do this. This is not a problem for me at all. And that's fantastic. Other people may be a little bit down when you're looking at this, right? So what we're going to talk about is some alternatives if you don't think that you might be able to get invited right away under the system, what can you do? Okay, so Zia, do you want to take it away about the provincial nominee?
Yeah. So what Elizabeth has spoken about is the federal programs, right? Express Entry is a federal program. There's also provincial nominee programs. And what this means is that the federal government has allowed provinces to create programs to help facilitate permanent residence. And so each province is a little different in terms of their eligibility criteria and the process. We're going to be focusing on Ontario's programs. Now, when you're looking at the Ontario provincial nominee programs, the easiest way to divide them is those that work with Express Entry, so they're Express Entry streams, and those that are outside of Express Entry. So first, let's talk about the Express Entry streams, since Elizabeth just finished talking about Express Entry as a whole and it's still fresh. So when we're looking at the Express Entry streams, the first thing is that you have to qualify under one of the federal programs and already be in the Express Entry pool. Okay, so the first step is creating an Express Entry profile like Elizabeth just talked about. And then from there, what Ontario will do is issue you a notification of interest. So basically it's a letter saying, hi, Elizabeth, I'm interested, we're interested in you, Ontario's interested in you, come apply to us. Okay, and then it's with that letter that you can actually apply to Ontario. Now, Ontario has a couple different streams that fall under this Express Entry categories. The first one is the Human Capital Priority stream. So this is for individuals. The criteria include language, work experience. This is a very general Ontario stream that they have. Now, the way Ontario has been issuing notifications of interest through the Human Capital Priority stream is that they've been doing specific draws. Okay, so their draws look at the areas that you have work experience in, so the occupations, and your overall CRS scores. Okay, and when we look at these draws, we break them down into those that are tech-based, so what we call the tech draws, and then the general draws. With the tech draws, with both of these, there's specific, like I said, occupations that Ontario has identified and that they are targeting for their Human Capital Priorities draw. The tech draws is a more static list of occupations, whereas their general ones they do change depending on the labor market needs of Ontario. For the Human Capital Priority stream, one important point to note is that in terms of education, you do need to have either a bachelor's degree or higher level education in order to qualify for this stream. Now, the second program here is their skilled trade stream. For this, you do need to have at least 1 year of work experience specifically in Ontario and in one of the listed trades within the past 2 years. Okay, so same idea, they go into the pool, they look at CRS scores, and then they do a draw and issue the notification of interest. But the main criteria for the skilled trade stream is that you do have to have at least 1 year of work experience in Ontario within the past 2 years. The third category is for French-speaking skilled workers. And for this program, you do need to have a CLB level of at least 7 in French and 6 in English. Okay, so this means that you've done your language test and you're proficient in both official languages, right? So you've done your English and your French test, and on those tests, you've received at least a CLB 7 in each category of that French test and at least a CLB of 6 in each category on that English test. And again, for this French-speaking skilled worker stream, you do need to have a minimum of a bachelor's degree or higher in order to be eligible. So looking next then at non-express entry streams. Okay, so we've looked at the express entry ones where you have to create a profile first. Then there are streams where you do not need to have an express entry profile, so you don't have to qualify under one of the federal programs first. There's a couple through what are called the employer-based job offer streams. Okay, so OINP has programs where if you have a permanent job offer that qualifies, then you can go through one of the employer-based streams. And again, this is not an express entry stream. Whenever we're looking at the employer-based programs, there are requirements on the employer that's offering you the position. There's requirements on the position that you're being offered and on you as the applicant. So let's first talk about the employer requirements, the company requirements. The company, if there's requirements on them in terms of their income that they've grossed in the past fiscal year, how many full-time employees they have at the time of your application, and how long they've been in business. So if the company is within the Greater Toronto Area, then their gross income has to have been a minimum of 1 million in the past fiscal year. They do need to have at least 5 full-time employees at the time of your application, and those employees need to be either Canadian citizens or permanent residents, and that business needs to have been in operation for at least 3 years. Comparatively, if the employer is outside of the Greater Toronto Area, then those numbers are reduced slightly. So we see that the gross income needs to be at least 500,000 instead of the million, and they need to have at least 3 full-time Canadian or permanent resident employees instead of the 5. As I mentioned earlier, the position that's being offered to you does need to be full-time, so that's a minimum of 30 hours a week, and it needs to be a permanent position. Okay. Now, in the employer-based stream, there's a couple subcategories. Okay, so we're looking, the first one that I want to talk about is the international student stream. Okay, so the job does have to be high skilled, but the wage that's being offered to you because you have recently finished a program. So this is for individuals who have recently graduated from a program here in Ontario, and you have to be within 2 years of having completed that program. Okay. Now, the program that you have completed needs to have either been a 2-year program or a 1-year postgraduate program that requires now it does have to have a degree in order to be eligible. So if the entry criteria says that it's a degree or experience or a diploma, then that will not qualify for the international student stream. The benefits of the international student stream is that you don't have to worry. The wage that's being offered to you can be at the entry level wage instead of being at the prevailing wage, which we'll see for other streams. So the second stream under the employer-based is the skilled worker stream. In this stream, this is for foreign workers who have at least 2 years of work experience in the last 5 years within the same occupation as the position being offered to you. So when we talked about the international student stream, there was no requirement for experience at all, but you did have to have finished a program of study here in Ontario. Comparatively with the skilled worker stream, you don't have to have any education. There's no education requirement at all, but you do need to have at least 2 years of experience in the same occupation as the position being offered to you within the past 5 years. Again, this program, the job offer does need to be high skilled, and the wage has to be the prevailing wage of the occupation for the location that you're being employed in. And then third, we have the in-demand stream. For this program, the position that's being offered to you has to be on a list of occupations, and the wage, again, has to meet the median wage. Additionally, to qualify under the in-demand stream, you do need to have at least 9 months of work experience, again, in Ontario, in the same occupation that's being offered to you. Now, this work experience, because it is limited to Ontario, it is important that that work experience was obtained on a work permit, and so that we can show that it was authorized work experience. For these 3 streams, for these employer-based streams, Ontario has changed the way that we apply through them. So in the past, when you qualified through any of these streams, it was a matter of creating a profile and submitting your application, so registering and applying. As of this year, as of 2021, Ontario has changed their system and their process. Now the first step is to create an expression of interest, right? So to create a profile in Ontario's pool, okay? You create this profile, you go into Ontario's pool of applicants, and then Ontario goes in and does draws. So when you're in the pool, you're given a score, and that score is the way that you're given a score is based on the exact program that you're applying through. And then Ontario goes into the pool and does a draw specifically for each program. So we're not talking about general draws. We're not comparing different programs together. Ontario is looking at each program separately and doing draws based on the program itself and applicants that are in that particular pool. Okay. Again, they're looking at score. So they're doing draws based on scores. They do have the ability to look further than that and give additional points for specific labor market needs that they may have. So looking at particular occupations or looking at particular locations, but generally they have a scoring system and they're doing draws based using that score that they've ranked everyone on. And so once you get an invitation from Ontario, then you have the ability to prepare and submit your application to the province. And once it's approved, so Ontario then assesses the application. If your application gets approved, you get a nomination certificate. With that nomination certificate, you can then submit your permanent residence application. One really important difference between these non-express entry and the express entry streams that we talked about earlier is that because these don't qualify through express entry, you're not going to get the additional 600 points that Elizabeth talked about earlier in your express entry profile if you do also have one. But and so then what that means is that when you submit your permanent residence application, the processing time is much longer for these employer-based streams. Okay. Now, importantly enough, here we don't see any eligibility criteria for language, right? Language is not a criteria here. However, based on the stream that you're applying through, you may be getting points for language. So you may see that it still becomes important to have language scores done as well. So it just depends on the particular program that you're applying through.
Just wanted to add, all of these programs, they change as to how many points can get through. Right now, for example, for express entry, Canadian experience class, where you have 1 year of work experience in Canada, those points are quite low. And so a lot of people are just applying for express entry. And these categories are less people. And if you have less people in the pool, then the points are lower in order to get invited to apply. Next year, it could be very different. If express entry points are high, then there will be more demand for these programs. Okay, so when it comes time for you to be ready to apply, actually, you should think about things long before you're ready to apply. You need to know how to get ready to apply, and that's why we're doing this program for you guys right now. Okay, but just be aware that things will shift, requirements may change as it goes along. All right, so I wanted to talk to you guys about the RNET program, the Rural and Northern Immigration Program, and that's because you guys are lucky enough to be in a program in North Bay. And North Bay is one of the very few communities that are qualify for the RNET program. Now, in order to qualify for this program, you have to get the recommendation from North Bay, which right now requires you guys to have a job offer. Okay, so the job offer should be coming from an employer inside the community. And if you have that job offer, then you can try to apply for the recommendation. Now, you also need to, in order to qualify, have either 1 year of work experience or graduate from an eligible study program. Okay, so if you don't have the 1 year of work experience, if you study in 2 years, study program of 2 years, and at least 18 months is in the community. Okay, so I've noticed from the question and answer, a lot of people are saying, oh, should I be in North Bay to study? If I can study online, should I even be in Canada? A lot of these things, you don't have to. You can legally study anywhere. But if you wanted to qualify for permanent residence, you need to know which program can I apply for? Which program do I want to leave the doors open, leave the windows open in order to do that? So if you're, for example, doing a 2-year program, but you're studying 1 year in Toronto instead of being in North Bay, you wouldn't qualify for this. Okay. It does have to be a 2-year program or more. Immigration, they don't seem to want to recognize the 1+1. Okay, that's another thing that you should think about, except if it, I mean, master's or PhD, you guys aren't doing that right now. It can be less than 2 years, but everything else is 2 year. And like I said, qualifying job offer in the community. Okay, the language benchmarks are really low for this. Most of you, if you can go to Canadore, you shouldn't have any issues with meeting the language benchmark. You can either have a job offer or have settlement funds as well. Okay, and so, it really depends. I think the job offer is one of the main things, and then seeing if the community will recommend you. Other than that, either having the qualifying work experience, which you can get while you're studying in the community and being in the community. This pilot is really concentrating on targeting people who want to be in North Bay. So you have to show that you have a willingness to be in the community. All right. One last program that we just wanted to talk to you guys about is the Caregiver Program. Zia, do you want to talk about that?
Yep. So with the Caregiver Program, there's 2 streams. You have the Home Child Care Provider Pilot and the Home Support Worker Pilot. Now, with each of these, there's 3 main eligibility criteria. You need to have at least 2 years, 24 months of full-time work experience that's in Canada, caring for either children, so under the Home Child Care Provider Pilot, or for individuals that may be elderly or may have high medical needs, and that's under the Home Support Worker Pilot. The care that you're providing does need to be within that individual's home, right? So this is really for providing care in someone's personal home, right? So within the house. The second criteria is that you need to have at least a 1-year post-secondary credential. Okay, so you have to have completed at least a 1-year program. And that doesn't necessarily have to be in Canada. That can be in Canada or outside of Canada. But if it is outside of Canada, then you do need to have an educational credential assessment. And then the third criteria is that there is a language component. So you do have to meet a CLB of at least 5 in either English or French. Okay, now, this program requires, like I said, the 24 months of experience. If you don't have that 24 months, then you can look at having a full-time job offer and getting a work permit through this program. With either of the pilots, either the Home Child Care Provider Pilot or the Home Support Worker Pilot, there is a maximum number of applications that IRCC will receive in any year. So for each of these, they'll accept 2,750 applications per program. Okay, now for 2021, the Home Child Care Provider Pilot has already met their quota, it's already closed, and so it'll reopen for new applications in 2020 on January 1st, 2022. The Home Support Worker is still open, they are still accepting applications at this time.
All right. I just, we've talked about a lot of things today, and I just wanted to give you a few things to take away as to what you need to be doing now in your positions. Okay. The first thing is you got to have a plan. right? We've given you some general rules that are current today, but for your specific situation, you need to have a plan. If you wanted to, I'll have our information afterwards on this. So if you wanted to book a consultation with us, we can have a plan for you. I really must stress that you should go with immigration lawyers. Even if it's not with us, go to a reputable immigration lawyer for advice, not to any consultants. Okay, they are, it's right now it's a mess with them. A lot of them aren't even regulated. For the regulated ones, there are a lot of issues with them. They don't go to law school. A lot of them have a lot of issues with the law. Go to a qualified immigration lawyer who has a lot of experience and map out a plan. Okay, once you have a plan, then you got to do it. Okay, you need, like, for example, language exams, the IELTS, CELPIP. It's very important for you guys to study for those. Even if English is your first language, even if French is your first and only language, you still have to study for them. I have many people whose English is their only language, you know, they have their master's degrees, etc., and they still don't do well on the language exams because they're not prepared for it. If you go in cold and you don't know what to expect, then you very well could fall up on it, right? And it takes time to do it. It's money. So make sure that you practice beforehand. Make sure that you do the programs that you need. You might want to and look at, you know, once you have the plan, you know what you need to do. Maybe you don't want to be on, since it's online, maybe you want to be outside of Canada right now and study at home. Okay, but you have to see if you want to get permanent residence, what does that mean for your permanent residence? Maybe you want to be in Toronto, but what does that mean? Maybe you don't want to study. What does that mean? Okay, you have to, what we've given you today is some general information to understand what you need to do. Then you have to make the decision of what your priority is. If your priority is to get permanent residence and stay in Canada, you have to be willing to do what you need to do. Okay, and make sure even the programs with your postgrad work permit, do you have enough time on your postgrad work permit? Is a 1-year postgrad work permit enough for you to get the work experience? Maybe you do need to do another program in order to get the 3-year work permit. Third thing is you need to stay in status. Okay, if you come to Canada and you stop studying, you don't graduate, you lose your status within 90 days. If you lose your status, getting your status back is going to be sometimes almost impossible, very difficult to do, okay? And if you lose your status and you go underground, your life is going to be very, very difficult. Whereas before, you're on a very wide road to get permanent residence, all of a sudden you will see the gates starting to close if you're out of status. Okay, so that's very important that you try to stay in status in Canada and not work, study illegally in Canada. Finally, if your application is rejected, contact a lawyer right away. Okay, there are very specific periods in which you can go to the court and have your decision. It's not an appeal, it's called a judicial review. If your decision is made inside Canada, it's only 15 days. Outside Canada, it's 60 days. If you pass that period, you can't necessarily go to court anymore. Okay. Also, don't think that IRCC is like Amazon, where the call center is there to solve your problems. The call center has very specific mandate, which is to administer the IRCC's interests, okay? Oftentimes, the people that you call will not give you proper answers based on your own circumstances. They're not there to serve you. They are not there for your benefit. They're there for the benefit of immigration. And whatever you tell them, it could appear on your record as well, okay? So contact a lawyer who will be there to work to your best benefit, not a call center. When a call center, you call call center, you say, hey, this is unfair. They might say, okay, why don't you just write an email, write a letter to them, to immigration. Okay, and so you follow them. Okay, I'm gonna write a letter. You don't know what to write, right? You don't know what to do. And they'll say no. And then you come to me, okay? You might go to a lawyer afterwards. You say, hey, Elizabeth, look, this is so unfair. I said, yeah, I agree. It's very unfair. However, now my hands are tied because it could be that we're out of time to go to the federal court and we're out of time to do another reconsideration, because when you submitted your letter, that is counted as one reconsideration and you only get one kick at the can. If I want to submit it again, immigration says, sorry, sorry. They already had their chance. We're not going to look at what you're writing, okay? There's also time limits, very strict time limits with regard to restoration of status or time when you can apply for postgrad work permit. So anytime you get a rejection, first thing you need to do, contact a good lawyer, okay? Now, here's our information about if you wanted to book a consultation to go over your own plan. You can email us and let us know that you've come to this webinar, and then we will give you the webinar discount as well. Okay, so let's go through some of the questions that you have.
So just before we get into that, today's session will be emailed out to you along with the slides over the next couple of days. I know that's a question we're getting a lot. So just thought I'd just let you guys know that a link will be sent to you along with the slides by email.
Okay, perfect. Yes, we will send out these slides, and then the video will be on our YouTube channel, and we'll send you the link for sure. Okay. Okay. So Zia, one of the questions we had was if someone wanted to live in Ontario while they are attending the classes online, are they allowed to do that? Should they do it?
Oh, that's a good question. Okay, so there's a different answer pre-COVID and today during COVID, and then again post-COVID, okay? Pre-COVID, any class that you did online, that online component would then be considered to be distance learning, okay? And that could affect eligibility for your postgrad work permit, okay? So if 50% or more of your program was done online, then you may no longer be eligible for that postgrad work permit, okay? Now, during COVID, IRCC has definitely understood that everything has moved online, and so students are not currently being penalized for classes that are done online, okay? So let's say you've started your program and you did your full program online already because of COVID. That's fine, don't worry, okay? Now, post-COVID, right? So once COVID is done and we go back to fully being in person, I think we're going to see those same rules as pre-COVID, where if you do end up doing your program online, it will be a problem. But for now, anything that's online because of COVID is not going to affect eligibility. I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Well, I think the question was where they're attending it. So online is one thing, right? Right now, online is fine because of COVID and most classes are online. But the question of if you have the program in Canadore in the North Bay campus, is it okay if you're in Toronto to study? That is legally allowed, okay? That is not illegally for you to study on that. That's legally allowed. But what you do want to think is, okay, how does this affect my future eligibility for different programs? For example, the RNET program requires you to be in the community 18 months while you're studying in order to get the education qualification. So if you're doing a 2-year program and you're outside of the city for a year, and you're only in the city for a year, then you lose that eligibility. Now that may or may not be important for you because you may qualify for permanent residence in other ways. What I do think is important for people to understand is the express entry requirement for you to be in studying for at least 8 months in Canada, which has not changed yet. Okay. And so let's say that you are doing a 1-year program and you're outside of Canada and you have a choice to be in Canada, right? And you say, oh, I just decided I don't want to be in Canada right now. Later on, if this rule does not change and immigration has not yet changed this, and they may never change it, then you may be losing out on the 15 points for express entry. 15 points could be this significant. It could mean the difference between you getting an invitation to apply for express entry or not. So a lot of these things have to come into consideration when you're going to be deciding on what to do with regard to your application. Okay. All right.
And I have a question for you, Elizabeth.
Yes.
So if I got my study permit approved, I'm in Canada, or I'm traveling to Canada, I'm in Canada now, and I want to either change to a different program within the school, or if I want to stop studying altogether, can I do that? And what are the effects of doing that?
Okay. So stop studying and changing programs are two completely different things. If you want to stop studying and you don't finish your program, you're going to be in big trouble within 90 days. After 90 days, you lose your status. You don't have any status. It doesn't matter when your study permit expires. You don't have any status. When you don't have status in a country where you are not a citizen or permanent resident, that is very scary. I cannot emphasize that at all enough, okay? You can be held in detention and deported. You can be held in jail. I have had people, students, okay, contact me in the jails where they have been out of status and they just didn't finish studying. It doesn't seem like a big deal, but it is for immigration law, okay? So make sure that you have a plan. If you don't want to study, you need to apply for visitor status, and you can't study, you can't work. What are you going to be doing? Okay. If you wanted to change program, that is allowed. Okay. If you wanted to change program and it's within a DLI, okay, you can just contact immigration and say, hey, I'm changing programs. Your study permit normally allows you to attend any DLIs. That being said, you have to think about your future. So if you are going to a DLI that is not a public school, okay, it may be cheaper, it may be in Toronto, it may be in a big city, it may be where all your friends are, but what is that going to get you? You're not going to be eligible for a postgrad work permit afterwards, okay? If you want to change program because of interest in the same college, then that's fine. That's not a big deal at all, okay? I don't even think you have to contact immigration for that. You can just change programs there. So, you know, whatever you do, you need to keep in mind about your future. How is that going to affect your status? How is it going to affect your eligibility for permanent residence? All right. Zia, do you recommend express entry or OIMP employer-based for skilled worker category?
It depends. It really does depend, right? Anytime we're looking to see what the best option is for an individual, the only way to do that is to really spend the time going through that person's background and determining how they best can meet their immigration goals. So in this case, applying for permanent residence. What I'd recommend is, you can send us an email at the email address that Elizabeth has displayed here, inquiries@LM Law Group, and we can schedule a consultation. During that consultation, we'll be able to go through your background and determine what's best, right? So what you qualify for and how you can apply for permanent residence. There's no other short answer, unfortunately. There's, immigration is very specific to an individual's circumstances. There's no one solution fits all. Elizabeth, next question for you. Can I apply through multiple immigration programs? So can I apply through a provincial and a federal program at the same time?
Yes, for the most part, you can, as long as they don't conflict. So for example, you can apply for a program for express entry, you can apply for OIP application, You only get one PR in the end, but you can go different routes to do that, okay? Where it conflicts is, you see, some people, they might be in Quebec, okay? And Quebec has a completely different immigration system from the rest of Canada. And so if you're going to apply for something in Quebec, and then you also want to apply for something in Express Entry, then you're not allowed. Because if you're going to apply in Quebec, you have to say that you want to live in Quebec. If you want to apply for Express Entry, you want to say that you want to live anywhere but Quebec. Okay, same thing with provincial nominee programs. If you're going to apply under the Ontario Provincial Nominee Program, and then you later move out of Ontario, you want to go and live somewhere else in another province, you can certainly do that. But your Ontario Provincial Nominee Program will likely be rejected, or your permanent residence under the Ontario program will likely be rejected because Ontario wants to nominate people who live in their province. Okay. All right, so some advice to extend their work permits if the program is only for 8 months. I just wanted to touch base on this 8-month thing. Now, immigration says 8 months, you get an 8-month program, but that's not necessarily the case for most programs. When they say a 1 year, it means a 1 year academic year, and most academic years are actually 8 months, 2 semesters. So most people who graduate from an 8-month program, it's actually a 1 year academic program. You'll get a 1 year work permit. Okay, but let's just say someone only does a 1 year program. Any advice on what they should do, to extend their postgrad?
To extend, so if you've already gotten your postgrad,
yeah.
Okay, so if you're already working and you're on your postgrad work permit and it's expiring soon, contact an immigration lawyer who can go through your options and see what work permits you can qualify for, or if you can qualify for permanent residence. There are other work permits, they just may involve more steps to them and may be a little bit more difficult than with the open work permit. But certainly I think you'd be looking at, again, schedule a consultation. We can go through your background and see what the options are that are available to you. We may be able to apply for a different type of work permit, potentially working with your employer to get an LMIA-based work permit, depending on your experience, or looking at a totally separate work permit, like a francophone work permit for those that speak French. But it will depend, right? There's no one solution here. It really does depend on the circumstances. But we would want to look at seeing how you would qualify for another work permit, or alternatively, if you qualify for permanent residence, we may be able to apply for your permanent residence and then apply for a bridging open work permit to allow you to continue working and living here in Canada while you're waiting for a decision on that permanent residence.
I would also say that the question is not how, it's if you can as well. Because we'll see a lot of students who haven't gone to this webinars. Now that you've gone to this webinar, you know better, okay? You know better. Don't say we didn't warn you, okay? It is very difficult to get another work permit after the postgrad. The postgrad you think is so easy. I just apply for the work permit. I graduate, I apply. There it is. It's so easy. It's your golden ticket. You only get one in your lifetime. If you want to apply for another work permit, you may not be able to, okay? Most of the time, the employers are not going to want to apply for a labor market impact assessment, LMIA, where they have to show they can't find a Canadian to do the job. And even if they wanted to, they probably wouldn't get it because you don't have really specialized experience that other Canadians don't have, okay? There may be some programs we can do, but a lot of times people will come and there may be nothing that they can do to get another work permit, okay? So make sure you plan properly. If you think, oh, you know what, I'm only going to get a 1 year work permit because I don't want to study anymore, but you have to think down the road, what happens if you don't get a job offer right away? Right now it's COVID, it's not that easy. And it's not just any job offer, it's high-skilled work experience that will count, okay? So planning and then doing what you need to do, very, very important. Okay, guys, We're out of time right now. We're actually way over, half an hour over. But thank you so much for your great questions and attending.
Okay, thank you so much, Elizabeth and Zia, and thank you so much. Just like in the past time, gave such a good informative session to our Canadore international student. Much appreciated on that. And I would like to emphasize to all the Canadore international students that you are the temporary residence holder in Canada. So some of the certain conditions you will need to comply to your status. So making sure that you plan ahead of the time with the proper guideline and accordingly to all the policies, and then pursue your plan step by step, because this one, there's no fast check and there's no playback. All right, so you will have to plan ahead of the time, do your planning. Right now, you are as the international student, so everything you do in the right place in the near future for your PGWP, for your pathway toward to your PR or even eventually Canadian citizenship, this is the option for you. So international office will provide some guideline or advice based on the study permit, work permit, co-op, visitor visa. But if you like to have customized service to your personal situation, please find a good reputed lawyer like Elizabeth and Zia or some other else, but making sure you're looking for the right person. Okay, and thank you so much again, Elizabeth and Zia. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
All right, take care.